let's get started. Welcome, guys, and thanks everyone for jumping in, and thank you guys for making time tonight at the very, very late hour of 8 o'clock, which is
Yeah,
most of our bedtimes.
it is.
But
Lovely.
it's the best time to kind of be able to share the most information with the most people. So here we are. My name is Kim. I own and run Sparks Academy, as well as Sunshine Family Support and Crushing Goals. And we have Jameen and Delia here tonight from More Than Able. Now, More Than Able is a multifaceted allied health provider here on the Sunshine Coast. So they do lots of things, including, correct me if I'm wrong, you're still doing remote services.
Yes.
So for people who
Yep.
don't live on the Sunshine Coast, so
Yep.
if you're keen on these guys and you want to get in touch, please do. More Than Able. So I just wanted to start with you guys telling us a little bit about yourselves, and you can rock paper scissors for who goes first. But what brought you into
I
your?
see you take a big sip.
She's like, I couldn't possibly. I'm
Yeah.
drinking tea, you
My
see.
mouth is full. Oh.
So
So first of all, Kim, how far back do you want us to go, or do you just want the cliff notes?
well, look, the Cliff Notes is fine, but give us a little feel about what brought you
Sure.
to the career you have, and what drives you, and
Yeah.
what kind of brought you to the point now where you've got quite a big provider on the coast and you're helping out
Yep.
lots of families.
Yeah.
And go.
Great. Um, so I think a lot of what started for me is I had a sister with cerebral palsy, so I was raised in a household of disability. I was the older sister and she was the younger sister, and we had a physio come out to our house when she was about 10 and worked with her doing a home visit, and the physio got me involved
Mm.
with the session with her, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And then in there I said, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to help people like my sister. And that is what I've strived to do. Never in my wildest dreams did I picture this is what it would look like.
Yeah.
It's more than what I could ever imagine, but like that's where my drive for More Than Able has come from. But obviously with my accent you can tell I'm from America. So it's led me on a crazy journey to Australia, and that's where I've started and build this beautiful More Than Able. But in that's like the cliff notes of my side. But then I met Jameen
Mm-hmm.
when I graduated uni and took a new grad position in Rockhampton,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where Jameen and I met. I was the physio and she was the OT, and we became besties from like the start, and we have very similar outlooks on life in general,
Yeah.
but also our values are basically the same on how we view disability and how we view therapy and how sessions should work, and how we feel about helping in general.
Yeah.
And so in little central Queensland is kind of where we birthed not really the idea of More Than Able, but
Yeah.
the idea that we will always we're going to work together
Yeah.
and we're going to
Yeah.
do something with this.
Yeah.
And then Jameen moved to the Sunshine Coast, and then I followed quickly after that because,
You can't leave your bestie
No.
behind.
well, also like
I had a plan.
yeah, like it was a bit rude, but
Yeah.
here we are.
Look,
It worked
I
out for
just
the best.
when I left Rockhampton, I moved to the Sunshine Coast, and I very clearly said to so many of my favorite people, "Okay, and now you move." And Delia did. So
And I did. Like literally a year to the day I moved. And then she's like,
Wow.
"We're gonna start a business." And I was like, "Oh,
Okay.
okay."
Yeah.
And like it happened, we had like a whole year planned on how we were gonna build and develop this business, and it happened within like 3 or 4 months
Wow.
rather than a year. So everything just fell in place, and we opened More Than Able, and it's turned into this big, beautiful business that's helping a lot of families.
Yeah.
Did I miss
Yeah. That's
anything?
no, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, okay.
That's great. Okay. Jameen, your turn. Well, my family actually moved to Australia from South Africa when I was 13, and we moved to Emerald, which is even more rural than Rockhampton. And I went to high school there, and at that point, so Australia, I think there's a lot of families who are like this, but in South Africa, when your parents are asking you, what do you want to be when you grow up, they sort of just hand you a university course catalogue, and that's how the conversation starts. So I always knew I would go to uni, but when I was in high school, I was planning to be a pediatrician. And then I did one semester of physics, and I thought, Probs not. Um, it was not my idea of joy. So we had a guidance counselor at my high school, and I remember having a meeting with her when, you know, you had to choose all the subjects or whatever, and she talked about occupational therapy, and I was like occupational health and safety, and she was like, no, and I was like, so I help people find jobs, and she was like, no. And again, the course catalog for the university came out, and that was the first time I heard about OT. And by happenstance, or maybe not, maybe it was not coincidental, there was a traineeship at the local hospital in allied health assistance. And at the time, because it's Emerald and no one could get staff, there was only an occupational therapist. And I happened to work alongside her for like 2 years while I did a traineeship.
Wow.
And over that time, I got to work with physios and speechies and all sorts of things as well. But there was a family that I knew at the church that I was a part of in Emerald, and they had a baby who was born with Down syndrome. And I was 16 years old, and I don't really understand how this happened. I think I was doing like Sunday school or creche or something, but I just remember every single Sunday I would end up holding this gorgeous baby. His name is Liam, and he's just stunning. His mum is still really good friends with my family, and like they're a beautiful family. And I just remember staring at him every weekend, or like when we would have barbecues or whatever, I'd always just end up hanging out with this baby. And I wasn't a very clucky teenager. I wasn't that person, but I just was like, he was just stunning. He had the squishy cheeks, and I just loved him. And then I started working as an allied health assistant with a lot of kids like him, and I just got to see what they did. And so I was like, all right, here we go. And so I went and studied to be an OT, and then I studied on the Sunshine Coast, actually. So I moved from Emerald here to the gorgeous coast. And then when I graduated, it was before the NDIS existed. And so just like Delia, if you wanted to work with kids, you had to go regional, you had to go remote. And so my choices were Mount Isa or Rockhampton. And I was like, all right, Rockhampton it is. And then Delia ended up being my desk buddy. And we worked in the Department of Education together as new grads. We did our first little bit of work there. And then shortly after, look, all respect to the Department of Education therapists. I think there's a special place in heaven for them, but it was where my dreams went and died. So quickly, I left and went into private practice. And then Delia and I worked together in private practice for a number of years. And then it was actually before I left Rockhampton that I decided we were going to start a practice.
Oh, that's right. You turned to me at the desk. Yes. And I clearly said no.
Of our personalities and our friendship for you, Kim. We sat next to each other at our desks. I turned to Delia and I was like, I think we're going to start our own practice. And she was like, that's dumb. Why would you want to do that? And I just died a little bit inside and just like spun back to my keyboard, and I was like, okay.
If you don't want to be friends, it's fine.
It's fine. You don't have to be nice to me. But yeah, so moved back to the coast, and then a couple of years in, we started More Than Able. And I guess it was born out of, I think as a clinician, people who work in private practice, you know, after a little while, you kind of develop your own ethos and your ethics and your clinical reasoning kind of meet, and you're like, this is how I want to practice. And there's limited flexibility in doing that when you're working for someone else who has their own idea of how they want you to practice. And because we are, you know, everyone talks about neurodiverse affirming, and I love that, and we certainly practice as a neurodiverse affirming practice, but we're also very affirming of disability in general. And that wasn't really something that was common when we started.
That's so shocking. To hear that.
It feels like it was a lifetime ago, but this was, you know, going back, how long have I been? 8-9 years. It wasn't a thing. Disability was still something you wanted to fix, and you wanted everyone to be normal, whatever that even means. And so we very much just wanted to carve out a space where it's all in the name. We believe that every single person is more than able to live a purposeful and a meaningful life, regardless of how their body or their brain functions. It's not about changing them. It's about getting to know them, getting to know their world, and bringing the best out of each individual child, and then supporting their parents in getting to see the world from their perspective and creating space for them to build this big, beautiful life together.
Yeah, we really strive to look at the child holistically, or the family holistically, whoever it is that we're helping. So that's why we strongly believe in multidisciplinary practice, is because every child is more than their gross motor skills. They're more than their sensory presentations. They're more than their communication. They're, you know, they're more than their behaviors. And you can't have one without the other. And so we work really hard to make a really good team to support the families.
Yeah, it's amazing. From my perspective, that's the best way that I've found as a parent. It's very difficult when you're seeing one allied health person in one business and then a whole other business, the different, it makes it really hard. But thank you both. That was beautiful. A lovely story of how you guys came together. I love that. It's so nice working with your bestie.
I mean, it's bloody hard work. I really can't imagine not doing it with Delia.
No.
You've got to have someone who doesn't care about the no filter on the hard days.
Yep. Absolutely.
So look, that's great. I'm glad we've got a little bit of background on you guys. I'm just going to jump in and talk a little bit about Sparks Academy before we actually get started. On the 26th of September, we're going to be hosting a free live event, finding clients and managing clients, and then we're going to be opening the registration for Sparks Academy. So the location is going to be confirmed as we get closer. It's either going to be Instagram or Facebook, but we'll put links out, and then you can sign up for sparksacademy.com.au. If you want to get those notifications, just head over to our website, and that's going to be our next thing. So 26th of September, finding and managing clients, that's our next thing. So now that we all are in the know, let's get started with our conversation, and we'll start with one of the most common questions that I'm sure you guys have answered probably a million times. What do you do?
I was going to say, my guess is, what is an occupational therapist?
Yes. What is an occupational therapist? What is a speech therapist? What is a physio? Like, what do you guys actually do?
I will go first this time. So an occupational therapist is not someone who works at employment services most of the time. But essentially, and the word occupation, I think, is what throws people. But an occupation is quite simply anything that we do. So whether that is going to school if you're a child, or making a sandwich, making a cup of tea, driving a car, being a wife, being a husband, being a sister, all of these different roles that we fill and all of these different tasks and activities that we complete are all different aspects of occupations. And essentially, an occupational therapist exists to help people do the occupations that are meaningful and necessary to their lives. So whatever the barriers are that are between the individual and them engaging with those occupations is the thing that occupational therapists identify and work to overcome, support, minimize, whatever that looks like. So the reason that it's so confusing is because that literally fits into so many different spheres and age groups. As a disability-specific pediatric occupational therapist, what I do is, my specialty area would be 0 to 6. My favorite area of practice is complex disability. So complex disability includes physical disability, cerebral palsy, genetic conditions, autism, assessments, diagnosis, treatment, the whole lot. So I work with kids and with their parents very closely to identify, okay, what are the things? Is it cognitive? Is it motor? Is it communication? Is it sensory? What are the things that are making it really difficult for this little person to develop, to engage, to play, to move forward and develop this big, beautiful, purposeful life? So therapy can take lots of different forms, from education to coaching to intervention to splinting to equipment, whatever the child needs in order to move forward and to develop and to engage. And then speech therapy, I will take that one as well, Delia, and then you can do physio and psychology.
Beautiful. So kind.
Speech therapists are concerned with communication. So communication is more than just talking. Certainly working on pronunciation and sounds and word formation and speech sounds and literacy, all of that stuff, phonics, the whole lot, that's all speech therapy. But communication is another big part of that. So your receptive communication, your ability to understand information, expressive, your ability to express, whether that's verbal or non-verbal. So speeches, not as many as I would like, work in the AAC area, which would be, Proloquo, POD, PECS. We don't love PECS, but all of these sorts of augmentative communication is something that a speechy would provide to help a person to develop a meaningful form of communication so that they can express their wants and needs. And speeches can also work in swallow and feeding management. They also are this incredible professional who can work in lots of different areas, but where we're concerned, it's in development of communication and sometimes feeding and swallow.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. Can you speak a little bit more about augmentative communication? Because some people haven't come across that before, or maybe that's something that a participant's sort of heading towards, and just because we're talking specifically to support workers tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. So AAC can take lots of different forms, and I would just like to make a big disclaimer that I am not a speech therapist. However, as an OT, best practice is that AAC is delivered by an OT and a speechie together. And sometimes if the person has a physical disability that requires them to have supportive mobility equipment, the physio should be involved as well. Because selecting AAC is broadly the speech therapist's job, because they understand the person's intent to communicate. And so then that helps them to understand what system is going to be the most effective to meet them where they're at. The OT comes in and we work at, okay, so how can we access that AAC? Are you someone who has a visual impairment? Okay, cool. So I'm probably not going to recommend that you have an ALS board with lots of different pictures that you're pointing to. But if you have the kind of visual impairment where you can see something with high contrast, which most of our individuals with cerebral palsy will present with some level of CVI, which is a visual impairment, they often will have great success with things like Proloquo to Go on an iPad, or even iGaze. Toby Dynavox has a whole range of like tablet-based AAC, where some of the technology is sort of point and scan, select, touching a screen. Some of it's controlled with a switch, some of it with a joystick. Some of it is with the eye gaze, which is so cool. It calibrates to your eyeball, and then where your eye is looking on the screen is what it selects on the technology.
That's totally amazing.
It is so cool. It's one of the my favorite that I've worked with along speeches. Yeah, so AAC, it can be high tech and it can also be low tech. So that is your pod book. It's your, symbols, it's keyword sign, it's sign language. I'm sure I'm missing many things. ALS, there's also objects of reference, which is a really good starting point, and it's very popular in the UK actually, where they will, for example, Delia did this amazing trip years ago to some of the special schools there, and so like if the kids are learning to communicate and they need to go to the bathroom, they're handed a frame that has either a nappy in it if they are incontinence aids and they're going to go get changed, or there's a little miniature toilet so they can touch it, they can see it, they can feel it, and so there's these objects of reference that they use to start building that competency around intent to communicate and understand.
That's really cool.
So AAC it's incredible, but finding the right system, sticking with it long enough for it to be effective, and then having a strong advocate to make sure that all of the communication partners in that person's life, including support workers, are trained and equipped and confident to give it a go, stumble through and learn a new language so that that person can communicate is really important.
We'll come to that later. I've got a question about that.
I'd like
go ahead.
to add into that, Jameen. I think a lot that you skipped over really briefly, and it's a big part of the AAC side of things, is with OTs, is helping them understand the access, but even the point. So some of our kiddos who fatigue really quickly, who don't have great control of their dexterity, sometimes a pointing option is not the best way to do it, or where it's positioned to make it easier so they don't have to use as much effort throughout the day to communicate is really important from the OT perspective as well. Because they might be accurate in the morning, but if they're not accurate in the afternoon, it's not an effective communication device then.
Oh, amazing. Thank you. All right, your turn.
Oh, me?
Yes.
So this is physio, right? That's me. But but when everybody hears physio, they think, oh, great, you're gonna give me a massage, or you're gonna stretch me out, or you're gonna give me some exercises. But if we think about a pediatric, I don't do any of that. I do, but I embed it. I don't do massage, but exercises and stretches, I embed them into play. But as a pediatric disability specific physio, a lot of what I do is play based, because that is where a child learns the most. And there's been lots of research and studies around when a child is playing, their whole brain lights up. And so their communication centers, their cognitive development, their sensory, gross motor, fine motor, all of that lights up at the same time. So we know play is a very effective way to teach kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so I embed all of those strengthening things around that. But what I really think that I do is empower parents to better understand their child's physical presentation. And that's irregardless of disability or not.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think none of us are taught how to look at bodies and understand them and interpret what that means. And so from a physio's perspective, that's exactly what I do. I can look at a body and tell you, okay, so I can see some weakness happening here, so that's impacting A, B, and C. Your kid's falling a lot. Okay, well, their feet are interning, their hips are not developed. Like I can pick all of those points out. Okay, these are the playing skills that you need to be working on to help develop those muscles and joints to allow your child to have the best foundation to continue to develop on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just like Jameen, I prefer the complex kiddos, specifically with cerebral palsy, but I work with all types of kids. Um, but where I think a disability pediatric specific physio really shines is helping the families understand their kids and how they move. Because obviously when you fall pregnant, you don't anticipate that your child is going to have a disability. So there is no rule book, there is no handbook on how do I do this as a parent. And so I help parents like take my vision and see their kids in a different light. And so yes, it might look different than typical development, but that's okay. We can still achieve some really beautiful things, but we just have to change the way we think about it and change what walking might look like. It may look like you have a walking aid. It may look like you have to wear boots, but that's still independence. Independence looks different for everybody.
Yeah.
So that is different than your standard musculoskeletal physio. That is different than your neuro rehab physio. That is different than your vestibular physio. There are different aspects to physio. So if your child has a disability or you're a support worker and you're supporting a child who is attending physio and they're not as experienced in pediatric disability specific, they just need to have an open mind when they're looking at things and ask a bit of questions on how we can work that in throughout their day, because children should not be given an exercise regime unless it's age appropriate for them and that's what they're into, or a stretching program. It should be play based.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think there's a couple of questions coming up that I think this is going to tie into really well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Who knew there were so many different types of physio?
Not me until I got to uni. And then I'll talk a little bit about psychology. So again, with psychology, there's a variety of different styles and methods that you can be using. But from our perspective, a pediatric psychologist is really about working with the family, and helping them understand their child and working on attachment styles, communication, self-esteem, emotional regulation, and helping the families have the tools to help their children co-regulate and to form around the child. Because as you know, probably younger children or children with disabilities it's a bit tricky, or who are non-speaking, it's a bit tricky to actually do one-on-one psychology sessions with them. So it's more about supporting the family unit to help them through the journey. Because again, we talk about you give birth to a child and you don't anticipate all of these wonderful challenges, right?
Yeah.
And so you need a support unit that's going to help you through that, because it is a grief cycle and you're going to continually go through that cycle, and you need to be reaching out and making sure you're getting the support that you need to help you work through it and not get stuck in one of those cycles through the grief pattern.
Yeah. The area that psychology in the pediatric space, or in our experience, works in is in trauma counseling.
Yes.
So every individual with a disability has some level of trauma, whether that is because they are a neurodivergent person existing in a neurotypical world, or whether that is because there was trauma during
fuzzies.
Whoopsie days.
What? Yeah, so whether there was trauma during birth or medical trauma, sometimes the life-saving measures that can be taken at a hospital keep a bubble alive. Actually, the doctors and nurses don't tell parents this, but there's quite a significant trauma impact. And so we see a lot of kids come through who have sensory issues, regulation difficulties, behavioral concerns, and just developmental delay in general, where there's no underlying concern other than it was a difficult birth, they were intubated, they had an tube, they were on breathing therapy, whatever it is, where, you know, the body remembers. And so there's a little bit of difficulty adjusting. And so like often work closely together in supporting those as
well. Sorry, in assessments.
Oh yeah.
Psychologists can do assessments like cognitive assessments, ADHD, ASD, and like all of those different things to get them the diagnosis that they need.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's going to be one of your first stops as a parent if you're looking at those types of diagnoses.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you can see like clearly how having a service altogether it's almost essential. It's almost like inconceivable that you would do it any other way. How could you do it?
That's honestly, we think that all the time. There's like no other way I could ever practice again.
I mean,
unless it was this style.
You know, we work really hard to collaborate with other services outside of our clinic. But boy, you know, it's hard for parents, it's hard for kids, it's hard for other clinicians. I really, in a world, if you can have one of each under every roof, that's the best.
Yeah, agreed. That's great. Thank you. So the next question I've got here is, how can a support worker collaborate more effectively with allied health professionals?
I'll start on that one. I have a lot of support workers who bring little people to the clinic, or I have had over the years, for their OT sessions. And not all of them, but some of the time, they like to just have a little scrolly doodle do on their Instagram.
A little look at the Instas.
I'm assuming it's Instagram because it's not as loud as TikTok, but you know, that, or they're texting, or they're just chilling. And I think the easiest way for a support worker to connect with the allied health team is to get in there during a session. If your job is to take a child to their allied health appointment, you are the parent for all intents and purposes. You are the communication point. You are the support person. Your job is to support the child to engage in therapy, but it's also to pretend to be mum or dad, so that when you go home at the end of your shift, you can tell mum and dad what we did today is A, B, C, D, and E. Here is a note that I wrote down during the session of what the OT said, what the speechy said, what the physio did. I noticed that we added this new game and Billy did such a great job. So being that person, being a support worker and supporting parents and kids means that you have to actively participate with the allied health. I think the sessions is the first and easiest way, if that is literally part of your shift. And then the other thing is, you know, simple methods like looking at documentation that's made, looking at home programs that have been provided. We are very big fans of making picture guides of like, hey, this is how you use this piece of equipment. Step 1, step 2, step 3. So Julia is notorious for, she'll literally strap it to a standing frame. Or, you know, if you make communication guides, I will like stick it to the folder that's stuck on top of the bag that comes back and forth from therapy. So just looking around for these resources that exist, or, you know, really having a purposeful conversation with family or with a support coordinator or with your employer to go, hey, I'm just noticing that I'm not getting any information from allied health. We often don't know support workers unless you attend appointments. We don't know who you are. We don't know shifts. We don't know your role. Are you there to support the family in terms of practical help, like meal prep, cleaning, carting kids back and forth from school? Or is part of your job actually the morning routine or using the standing frame or meal times? And we would love more hands on deck to implement routines and generalize those skills that we're working so hard on with the kids. So if we don't know, we can't give that information. So I think having that conversation often with families, boss, to go, hey, where are the guides from the OT, the speechy, the physio, the psych? What are we doing? What are the goals? That's a really easy way to just be active in pursuing it.
I think, and it's hard because support workers, they do so many things for so many families, and I think if they can take anything away from this chat is ask questions and get involved. We know that adding therapy into the day of the routine is just probably another thing that you have to take off the list, but be actively involved in it. It is important for whatever kid you're attending to attend or working with to attend this session. And if you're not asking questions and you're not getting involved, it's just another box that they're ticking. Like they have to have engagement from you to support that therapy.
Yeah.
And I think, potentially some support workers may feel like they're just sort of staying in their box. They're not interrupting. They're not, there might be that sort of thing going on. But actually, if you're in the session, nobody's going to bite your head off for asking a question or trying to get involved.
And if it's a therapist that doesn't want you involved, they'll tell you that. And I'd be questioning that. But but like there's a time and a place, and there's nothing wrong with just asking me like, hey, I am with Billy Bob most of the day and I really want to be able to support some of these strategies. Can I get involved? Can you give me a little bit of advice? There's nothing wrong with asking. And that's still staying in your lane. We're not asking you to write the programs. We just want you to actively engage and invest in it a bit.
Absolutely.
I think a really easy strategy around that, if you are feeling nervous, maybe you're newer to support work, you're newer to working with that child, you have never been to a therapy session, whatever the reason is that you're feeling a little bit nervous, simple strategy is to just right off the bat introduce yourself. That's my favorite thing that support workers do. They walk in, hi, I'm such and such, this is my first shift today, I'm not sure how this session usually runs, can you give me an idea of what you'd like me to do? Would you like me to sit out? Do you want me to sit in? I love it when they ask. And I think as any person in any role, but particularly support workers, if you're feeling nervous, just ask. Allied health kids in general, we're pretty nice people and we're kind of silly and a bit loose. And so we love a chat, if you can't tell already. So I think you're never going to go wrong by just asking a question. And the worst you'll be told is, no, please sit in the corner and scroll on your phone.
Yeah.
And then,
there might be those days where you're like, we're just going to get really stuck in here, don't interrupt, but watch what I'm doing.
Yes,
absolutely.
And it's a chance, to get some upskilling, because a lot of the skills that support workers pick up in the rooms with you guys do translate across other clients as well. So you're just constantly building your knowledge if you're actively getting involved and taking information in. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you, guys. We sort of answered a little bit of the next question. What are the expectations that allied health professionals have regarding support workers during the therapy session? So I think you pretty much answered that. Like, get involved, don't be shy.
That's literally it. Like, you can't. That's all we ask.
I mean, as a mum myself, I have sometimes had to send a support worker with kids to different things, and I want to know what happened. Like, if they're in the room. And like, if I can't be there, I want to know. So take notes, and parents will tell you, or guardians will tell you if they don't want that. But it's better to have it than not have it, for sure.
If you're unsure, take little videos, take photos, have something to share with the family, or even just for yourself of, I saw them do this cool thing, particularly kids with physical disability. I saw them do a sit to stand transfer. Get a video of that. Look at where people's hands are. Look what they're doing. So you can replicate and you can practice and you can show mum and dad when you get home, like, do you know they can do that? Like, I'm sure as nothing would make you feel more relieved and trust your support worker more than if they came home from a therapy session just buzzing with excitement and information that they got just from leaning in and being actively involved.
Yep, absolutely. That's a nice feeling, and you feel like, oh, this person actually cares. Like, they really like spending time with my kid, and they care enough to pay attention and enough to come and share it with me with enthusiasm. That's always, for me, that's a green light. Like, that's a good one. Rather than just like, oh yeah, it was fun. You're like, okay.
Sure.
Okay. How can we better support our clients or clients' families at home, particularly in following therapy plans? How can a support worker really get stuck in and do that kind of thing? Because and I know from, anecdotally, some parents are like, oh, I don't know, it's a lot. I'm not sure. How can we, one, be helpful and follow those therapy plans, and two, be proactive in the home as a support worker?
Mm. So are you talking about therapy plans that therapists have written for you to do at home?
Yeah, things that you might be doing at home, or say, for example, if you're working with somebody remotely and a support worker is going to be, a key aspect of that.
Yeah.
How do they put that into practice
Mm-hmm.
effectively?
Yeah, I think establishing routine is probably one of the best ways to do that in a fun way. It's all about making the activities that have been provided functional and providing that feedback to the therapist if it's not, because the therapist doesn't know unless you tell them. So I think if you have the plan from a therapist to work within the home, because it is a lot, we get it.
Yeah.
Everybody's day is very busy, and like to have to stop and do a physio program or an OT program feels like added stress to a day. So first of all, if it is feeling, it's not the right program for you, because these programs should be embedded into the day that you're doing. It should be in addition to, not you have to stop and do this program.
Right.
It should be incorporated into what they're already doing within the day, whether it's dedicated playtime they have, whether it's going to the park and doing activities, whether it's cooking, whether it's cleaning, whether it's specific games that they can play that target certain activities. It should all be embedded within the day. It should never feel like, oh, I have to stop and do my OT program now, or I have to stop and do my physio program. So I think making sure that, and you kind of just have to get creative with it as well, and be flexible, and some things are going to work and some things aren't going to work. And I think being open and providing the feedback honestly is how you're going to make it work within the day.
Yeah. Look, and I think on that, the practicality is definitely one side of it, but I think the temptation in any job where your hours can fluctuate, or if you're walking into an environment where parents are feeling burned out and overwhelmed, and their attitude may be a little bit of, oh, I don't know, it's just so much.
Yeah.
Then for the support worker, I imagine, would be being the person who is proactive in an environment where perhaps that's not been the focus, and that's not been with the capacity of the parents up until that point.
Yeah.
So I think taking the step to think about, all right, I've got 4 hours and I know that they haven't managed to incorporate any of that purposeful play. They haven't been using their AAC, probably can't even find the pod book. The wheelchair's just been sitting out in the garage. The kid's been bum shuffling through the house for 3 days. Think ahead. Before you get to your shift, you would have basic information. Even if it's your first shift with that family, you would have basic information about the child. But in an ideal circumstance, you would know the family a little and you would know the kid a little. And so if you can spend, it doesn't have to be an exorbitant amount of time, but 20 minutes undistracted, where you just about, how long do I have on my shift? What do I know that we need to be working on? Do we need to be using our equipment more? Do we need to be going through that morning routine? Do we need to be using our communication device? And think through, okay, how can I do what Delia just described? How can I just go about, we have 5 tasks to get done. We've got to get dressed. We've got to get in the car. We've got to go to school. We've got to drop off the brother. And then we've got to go to the grocery store and pick up the shopping. How can I incorporate all of this stuff into what we already have planned during our 4-hour shift? Oh, I know. I can find the backpack, pack the communication device, make sure their shoes are on. We've got the wheelchair. My boot is empty, so I can load everything in. And hey, I can incorporate all of these different communication activities in the car. I'm going to sing some songs. I'm going to make sure the keyword sign app on my phone charged, ready to go. So if I forget the keyword sign, it's a little bit of that proactive thinking that I think will save you a lot of feeling like, oh, I don't know what to do now. And, oh, didn't tell me, or all of these as people. And this is not coming from anything that resembles a high horse, because it's just as easy as a therapist to just coast and phone it in.
Yes.
But I think that proactive ownership and thinking through, what do I know about this kid and how can I make sure that we make the most of this shift with the tools that I have is going to go along. And then also make sure you're in on the conversation. I could count on one hand how many times I haven't had to chase down the support worker or the company that they work for to get them into an email train about stuff. Because unfortunately, support workers, you do such a pivotal job, but you're not often top of the list of who people think of to give information to, which
no, they really don't.
They would not your life easier, but it makes everyone else's life better. So my biggest encouragement is be proactive and really think about how can you do your job well. So if you're not in a conversation, ask to be looped in. We want information as allied health providers, but if we don't know that you exist or what shift you're working or who you are, you know, we try and chase around if we know people are involved and your companies are. You know, if it isn't done for us, that can often be tricky. And so I think it will make the support life easier part of that.
Well, just as the support workers are essential to the families, they're essential to us because we want that child to achieve as well. And if you're the person who is supporting the child the most, you're pivotal for us as well because you're carrying over all of our therapeutic strategies.
Well, a lot of the time, a support worker is the person who has that kind of discretionary time with the child, whereas the parents often don't. You're kind of trying to do 15 things at once and you don't really have time to get down on the ground and do the play or whatever. So that falls to the support worker. But yeah, I agree. They're not often in the loop, or they're just not thought of. And I can definitely say, you know, our superstar, in demand, most favorite support workers do everything that you just said. They're thinking about the family, they're thinking about the child, and they're thinking ahead of what they need to do and how they can, you know, tick some extra things off. Like they're not just coasting through scrolling the instas. So that's kind of, I think that's a really good takeaway, is to just get a bit more involved in your role and go that bit further and be curious because you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Exactly.
Thank you. Okay. So we have one more question, but I just wanted to put it out there. If you have questions, if you've been watching and you have some things you're wanting to know, just chuck them in the comments and we'll get to them. So the last question I have is, how do we manage families' expectations regarding a client's or a participant's progress? Because sometimes I think support staff can feel like, oh, we're kind of treading water here. Is what I'm doing making any difference? Should we be doing more? That kind of thing. So how do we manage a family or a staff member's expectations around that?
Man, that's a tricky question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Managing expectation, I think, is the hardest thing for most professionals who work with families in general. I think if you don't have a really clear understanding of the details of everything, it's hard to manage expectations of the families. But I can understand as how that would put a lot of pressure on support workers because they are the ones carrying out a lot of the support needs that are going to help the child reach their goals. And so I'm going to have to think on that one. Jameen, do you have some instant thoughts while I...
It's a difficult question. And look, this is something that we even wrestle with as therapists. And we talk a lot in our supervision, because the reality of working in disability is that the milestones are very small. The increments of development often be slow. And for the most part, you know, kids have, so from 0 to 6.5, 7 is that early intervention window, right? And so that the neural plasticity is there, development between those 2 points in life. So much development happens so rapidly for any kid. Kids with disability, kids without disability. Every single kid develops a whole, like they become a whole person in that time. And then things slow down significantly. There's another big leap that happens at about 9, a little bit more at 11, but then the next one doesn't happen until puberty, and there's a little bit of physical change, but like for the most part, you're a fully formed person by that point. You change a little bit, but not really. And then into adulthood, we're still learning, we're still developing, but it's much slower. And so when you have any little person who has a disability, and, you know, support workers are often working with all kinds of presentations, it's important, that you know what to look for as a support worker. If you know the condition of that child and you have not gone on to Dr. Google and done a bit of reading, you're doing yourself a disservice. Knowing some information, knowing the prognosis, knowing the general presentation and what things can be expected to look like in early life is really important. Because if you don't know what progress looks like for that child, how are you going to answer parents' questions or to answer yourself when we all have those hard days and those bad days where we feel like we've just plateaued and what are we even doing this for? And no one appreciates my effort and I'm working so stinking hard and nothing is changing and the kid just chucked an absolute nana and everyone's having a bad time and what are we doing here? And first step to overcoming any of those difficult feelings, I believe, is information. So knowing the condition, knowing what development even means or looks like at the point in life that that person is, because working with a 7-year-old is very different to supporting a 30-year-old. And so progress for those two clients are going to look very, very different. But if they're lucky enough to have people who love them, they're all going to have people who are interested in that progress and who are interested in knowing what the progress is supposed to look like. So if you don't know that information or even have a rough idea, how are you going to answer that? And how are you going to? So I think having that understanding is important. The other big thing is if you are actively involving yourself with the allied health professionals, if you're availing yourself to clinical information that is in reports that you have access to, in email conversations, you should have a general idea of what the goals are and what the clinicians are working on, what the goals are that are being set with mum and dad, with the teachers, that sort of thing. And having access to that information should give you a little bit of insight on that side of things. And so when, the parents or teachers are coming at you with questions, if you have that information in your back pocket, you can often feel a bit more confident to go, well, at physio, the goals are this and this at the moment. So if the goals at physio are just to do an independent pivot transfer between our wheelchair and the toilet chair, then the teacher's expecting that child to fully undress, toilet themselves, redress. That's not very realistic. Yeah. And so if you have that information, you don't have to pretend to be a clinician. You don't have to pretend to be mum or dad in that situation or in other aspects of things. But if you have that in mind and you're actively thinking and participating, it might be a little bit easier to have those harder chats. And then the other big thing is to be reflective. We talk about this a lot as allied health professionals. Reflective practice is important. And I believe for support workers, you're a key part of the care team. And so reflecting on where was this kid 6 months ago when I started working with them? Where was the family 2 years ago when I joined them? What can I reflect on? What did our days look like back then? And what do the bad days look like now versus the bad days? And what do the good days look like versus the good days then? And having a bit of that reflection of what have I tried and improved? What's working? What's not working? Having a little bit of that time in your notes, making sure that the documentation is happening can help you to remember, oh my goodness, we've actually come a really long way. With that little bit of encouragement that we need sometimes.
I would add on to that is remembering the holistic approach and how important it is to understand any progress is good progress, whether it's big, little, or massive. As long as we're moving forward, that is positive progress. And every child is complex in their own way, disability or not. And many factors play into every day. So did they sleep? Did they eat well? Or do they have a sore tummy? Do they have a headache? Was brother or sister up in the middle of the night? Did mom and dad have a bad day? All of that impacts progress. And so I think when parents put on some of these expectations that they feel like they have to meet, I think it's important for the support workers to have enough information and feel empowered enough to say, well, today or yesterday wasn't a great day because of X, Y, and Z. And so that's going to impact on the progress we're meant to see. And also on the reflection side of things, everybody takes photos of everything. That is the best way to reflect on progress. Take a photo of when you're at each session or with each child and just keep a little folder. And so you can go back and you can look on it and be like, wow, we weren't sitting up 3 months ago and look at us now. We're sitting up. It may not be perfect yet, but we're sitting up. And so we don't strive for perfection. We strive for progress. And so any type of movement forward is good movement.
Yeah, even those tiny increments.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for. I think sometimes, particularly with independent support workers who don't have that that team behind them, supplying the information and doing the background work of talking to you guys, for example, and gathering that and handing the information over. I think with the NDIS and the focus so much on meeting our goals, I think particularly independent support workers feel like, well, if I'm not meeting a goal, what am I doing? And that plays a part too. Unfortunately.
Can I share a little side information that makes me feel better on those days? I went to university and we spent an extraordinary amount of time learning about what a goal is. And time what is written in these gorgeous plans are not
a goal. Those are not goals.
I like to focus areas for sanity's sake. And, it is really good to have goals, but having a goal of Billy Bob will develop emotional regulation, first of all,
what
is
implying that?
No, Billy Bob's never going to develop being calm all the time unless he is drugged out, and we don't want that. So understanding what is a goal, and as a support worker, I take my hats off to support workers. I was a youth worker for a couple of years when I was at uni, which is essentially a support worker who works in resis. And it was hands down the hardest job I have ever done in my life. It was incredible, but it was so hard. And support workers are on the front line. You're in people's homes. You're in people's lives. As allied health professionals, I work with a kid for 1 hour a week, 1 hour a fortnight. I'm never going to change their life in that time. But their parents, their support workers, their support team, they're the ones who are doing it. They're the lives. And so support workers are, on the front line of all of this stuff, and there's so much expectation and so little support often that in support workers and anyone in this space, particularly in the NDIS space, it's very draining, and this is very hard work. And I think we just recently had someone say to us, it's important to remember that systems like the NDIS, while they are life-changing and there's lots of pros and lots of cons, they are not set up with any thought or planning to the overall health and well-being of the people who are working in the scheme.
It seems that way.
It's not set up to look after us or protect us or make us be able to stay in it for the long term even. And so as support workers who are essentially an unofficial part of the family, who have these enormous expectations and very little support, very little insight often, give yourself a pat on the back, give yourself a break, make sure that you are filling your own cup and tank back up, surrounding yourself with people who get it, because it is it is crazy. Like, we've worked outside and inside the NDIS, and it's really, really hard. So be kind to yourself. You guys do it.
Agreed. You give so much. All of the teams around families give so much of themselves. And it's exhausting, which is why why you guys and me go to bed at 8 o'clock, because it's exhausting.
Correct. Yes.
I just want to get to a couple of comments.
I need to sleep. Sorry.
Yeah, agree. Liv Margie says, hello, Liv Margie. I'm an OT student and not a support worker, but absolutely loving this. So that's great. Talk about
thank you.
Students. And then Marsha Bergman, this has been so reaffirming for me. I'm an ex-pediatric dental assistant and worked with many allied health practitioners and disciplines in public and private health settings. I'm now a new support worker. So that's great.
Welcome to the fam.
I think you guys are, everyone knows that you exist, but nobody's like, I don't know what they do. I'm not sure.
Yes.
So it's been really good.
We well understand.
To kind of shed a bit of light on that. And if people want to keep asking questions or putting comments, we'll come back. I'm going to keep an eye on this thread throughout the week, and it'll end up on our Facebook group. It'll end up in YouTube. And so, happy to continue the conversation if people are watching this at a later time. And I'm sure you guys, if there's some tricky question, I can shoot you a quick email and, or jump on and comment as more than able. That would be lovely. Please go ahead.
specific questions, because I know it's often difficult for support workers to ask specific questions that they may be struggling with that relate to participants because of confidentiality.
Yes.
They can feel free to shoot them through to you. You know where to find us. We're happy to have another chat, have an answer.
Yeah, for sure. We have a really great group that we've started called Support for Support Workers. It's a smaller Facebook group. I think we're up to 500-ish members now, but we're able to keep a really good eye on that, and some really great conversations and questions have come out of that. So if you're in the group and you want to ask a question there, please do, and I can get it across to these guys and get it answered. So just keep that in mind. Thank you so much, you guys. I really, really appreciate it. It's been great. Oh, thanks, Core. Core says, thank you for sharing this. Hope we'll have more Q&A in the future. Oh, you're welcome. That's great. Wonderful. Well, thanks, everybody. And don't forget, check out sparksacademy.com.au. Sign up if you want to get onto the next live. We're going to be having a series of these as well outside of the launch of Sparks Academy course. So we've got an accountant coming up. I think we've got some more compliance coming up. And I'm sure we could probably lure the allied health pros back again if people have questions they want to ask.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. All right.
Love it.
Good night.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.